So we have guideposts 1 and 2. I'll link them below. And we're getting into guidepost 3, which is narrative.
That's correct.
And this one, I think all of the guideposts are super profound. But I think this one is profound, not just from the narrative that you share with, the narrative you have with your loved one, or other people around you, but also about yourself.
Yep.
But I'm going to leave it to you, the expert, to kind of talk about what guidepost 3 is, and if you don't mind just giving a quick summary of the other ones.
Sure. So again, the 5 guideposts are these as follows: mindfulness, parts of self, the narrative, and choosing. Draw a big old line underneath those first 4, and then we have personal responsibility. The idea is that if we practice these 5 practices, either all at once, because you can do that, or if we just pick a few, and we practice these with our partner, and with ourselves, our relationships get that much better. The idea is, and the reason I use the term guidepost, is that I believe that, we as couples you're on a journey together. And sometimes we can lose our true north. We can lose each other. We can get off track, and it doesn't feel great. I wanted to give people something that they could practice outside of my office that would help, because too often, as I've said before, couples were coming to me early in my career and they were practicing the things that I was given to teach them. And before they got to the car, that shit was going off the rails. And a lot of hope was being lost. And I wasn't actually helping as many people as I thought I was. And people were becoming frustrated. When I asked the experts that I knew at the time, they said, "Welcome to couples therapy." And so I then went out and said, that can't stand. I need something that I can't charge people the money that I charge them, knowing that I'm handing them shoddy tools. These things don't really work in practice. And so I created these 5. I didn't create the 5 guideposts. I cobbled together things that were already out there, and in a unique way, certainly in a way that I don't think they've been put together before. And so you can reach into this toolkit as couples, and you can pull out mindfulness, and you can be mindful and aware of your parts of self, as we've talked about in the first 2 segments, right? Or the first 2 segments of the first 2 modules, really. And so when we become really aware of our thoughts and feelings, we can shut down those knee-jerk responses. That already automatically puts us in a better spot. And then we can change. We can train that mindful eye on the parts of us that are coming up. And as I explained before, we all have parts of self. Our brains are modular organisms. We have these different aspects of our personality that show up. Some of them are better at communicating and relating and loving and being compassionate, empathetic, and understanding than others. We want to make sure that the right part is showing up. And as I shared before, people don't have so many problems as they have parts issues. The wrong part of them starts showing up in their relationship because they become hurt or wounded. They don't really know how to recover from that. So this protective part of self continues to show up. The thing I didn't add in that last series of conversations we had about this was that those parts also tell stories. And that's where we get to guidepost 3, the narrative. And I became really acutely aware of just how impactful our narratives are. The stories that we tell, those little thoughts, those little one-off thoughts that we don't really give much weight to in the moment, end up carrying a lot of weight when we start looking at the science behind our thoughts and our feelings. We have a thought, and immediately the body fires off a chemical response to that thought. We call it a feeling. And if we continue to do that, and we sort of, again, give it not a lot of attention, they proliferate. And pretty soon, if I do it enough, I begin to wire my brain to think about that person, in this case, perhaps a loved one, a partner, in a not so great way. I begin to see them as see them in a way that I wasn't looking at them before. Before it was all puppy dogs and ice cream. Now all of a sudden it's like, you're that no account son of a bitch who only thinks about themselves. He always, she never, right? And those thoughts become a chemical reaction in the body. We have a feeling, those feelings create another thought, and here goes the cycle. And if you practice that long enough, I like to say you're actually rehearsing to fall out of love. Let that land on you.
Let me just sit with that for a second.
Drink it in.
I don't want to drink that. I don't want to put that in my mouth.
All the jokes, Sarah.
I'm uncomfortable, so I have to joke about it. I mean, so let's talk in like concrete examples about this, because I think, it helps to, like, this is exactly what we're talking about. For example, like what does a narrative look like? Is it something like, I hate the way you put those fucking dishes away? Or
Sure.
is it something like, I really don't like the way you look anymore? Or, like, what are these narratives?
Probably less about the dishes, because certain narratives carry more weight than others, but that might be the precursor to, I'm frustrated with you all the time, and I only look at the negative aspects of the things that you do. Like, I hate the way you put those dishes away or wash those dishes. I'm omitting a lot, which is that you actually tried to put the dishes away or tried to wash them. And so this is an important aspect that we need to talk about as far as narrative is concerned. From a narrative therapy is actually a form of therapy. It was founded in the 80s by Michael White and David Epson. You can forget their names as soon as I say them, but it's important to kind of, credit what it is due. And what they said is that people don't have so many problems as they have problem-saturated stories. And that we buy into these stories. And what's more is we prune these narratives, where we select information that supports the prevailing narrative, and we deselect information that does not. And so I say we do this about our partners all of the time if we're not careful. And so what we have is the dopamine blast of new love. Sooner or later that starts to wear off, because dopamine's not sustainable in the brain. And the reality of life and a very real person with, warts and farts and all, lands right in our lap. And so narratives start to form, and we prune out some of the really good things in a narrative. So I had one woman say, not too awful long ago, we were in a therapy session, and she just finally turns to her husband, who's trying to get it out of her, like, what's going on with you? Why aren't we connecting? Why don't you want to touch me anymore? And she turned to him and said, I don't know. I don't know why I hate you anymore. I just do. Right. And what we got to is, I hate you was really a story. I hate you was a narrative that she had formed about him. She was really hurt by him and really frustrated with him, and had felt abandoned by him. Those are the very, very real feelings underneath the narrative. So that narrative can be things like, that's not good naked. I don't really think I like you anymore. You annoy me all of the time. And so we keep doubling down on those aspects that we see or think we see. We keep noticing, like I said, not the good stuff, but only the bad stuff, only the annoying thing. And we're doing it through that protective or critical side of self. And pretty soon, our partners become, they can only be this thing that we've made them out to be.
So for people, obviously, that can't sit in a room with you and, like, parse through the initial story into the real issues, like, how do you get there? Like, what do you do? How do I, like, I recognize my story about my partner is negative. Now what? What do I do?
Yeah. So we go back to guidepost 1 and we go, okay, so I got to become really aware of when I'm doing this, really aware of the thoughts or the stories that I'm telling. Um, I can become aware of, again, that part of me that's up. And that's also a really good indicator of the type of story I might be telling.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm in a wound, if I'm in a protective side of self, I'm going to see everything and everyone in my life as a reason to defend. If I'm in a critical aspect of self, as we discussed before, I can only really be critical because that's what that part does.
Sure.
But turning up the volume is an exercise that I do with my clients. We have them turn up the volume, and it's sort of antithetical to everything that you'd think you'd want to do. It's like you want to scuttle those thoughts and feelings. You don't want to say those out loud, because if we say them out loud, maybe it makes it more real. The effect that turning up the volume on these things has, when we say them out loud or we write them down, we get a real sense of the magnitude of what it is we're telling ourselves, right? When it's left to the quiet of the mind, we can say some really terrible shit and get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
But when we make ourselves turn up the volume and we're like, I hate you, often it lands on people like, well, I don't really hate them. I mean, you've been telling yourself, you've been sipping on hate. I hate you for a while. Or
Right.
I'm not attracted to you anymore.
Right.
Or I think you're fucking stupid. That's one. Like,
Right.
like, as terrible as that sounds, that's one that people, throw on their partners often. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I guess that was a good idea. You fucking idiot. That never really often doesn't get said, but it gets said in here.
Mm-hmm.
So when we turn the volume up on that, we have to start taking personal responsibility, guidepost 5, which we'll get to, but we have to start taking responsibility for the shit we think,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the shit we tell ourselves, because those thoughts become feelings, and those feelings become part of our belief system.
Mm-hmm.
So that one-off thought of like, fucking idiot, becomes you're just a fucking idiot. And that's
Right.
kind of how I feel about you. And I've pruned out a lot of really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I've bought into and doubled down on that narrative for a very long time. And it rots the boat. It rots the hull of the boat of a relationship, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So we turn up the volume.
Right.
And then I take them through a process of like kind of owning it. And then I start getting to like to gratitude practices and meta meditations about your partner, appreciation and compassion practices to start to retool how we feel and to remember some of the stuff we pruned out. And then with that information, we do this thing called reauthoring, which is a practice that I borrowed from marriage or from narrative therapy, where you take the story that you've told and the new information and the unique outcomes that you've seen and have remembered through these gratitude practices and all of that, and you put together a new story that includes some of how you felt, but also a lot of really amazing things that perhaps you've pruned out.
Mm-hmm. That's it's interesting, and a question came up as you were talking, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot, which is, when do you know? So I think a lot of people would rehabilitate their relationships if they recognized this guidepost, like if they addressed this guidepost and said, maybe this person isn't all that bad, and it's just this story I've told myself over and over again because maybe they hurt me, or maybe something happened, or maybe I'm just, maybe there's a thousand other factors playing into it. So when do you know it's the narrative and not the relationship?
Well, you start with like, have I felt mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or physically abused in any way, right?
Sure.
Right, like the difference. I think most of us can tell the difference between a person who is treating us terribly, and I just am responsible for this story that I'm telling myself. There's a decided difference if you feel into it. I don't think there are too many people out there, and maybe I'm wrong, that can't look objectively. If 2 or 3 people in your life are telling you like this relationship is not great, you should get out of it, you should probably listen. Right? You've been telling yourself that for a very long time, and recognizing like, look, I've not been treated well. Like someone not loving you and caring for you in the way that you need to be loved and cared for after you've told them time and time and time again. If you're feeling mishandled, unloved, disrespected, not cared for, all of those, then it's not a story. It's just the truth of it.
Yeah.
But if you can start turning up the volume and becoming aware of the thoughts that are coming up for you specifically about this person, and ask the question, are these thoughts fair? Are they compassionate? Are they empathetic? Are they understanding? And if you can say, yeah, no, they're probably not, then it's probably a story that you've been telling.
I think it's a super important distinction, because as somebody who's been in bad relationships and made excuses for them, it's important to know, hey, no, this isn't narrative work. This is get the fuck out of that work. Yeah. We're talking about narrative work here. And I think there are a lot of people that are in relationships for periods of time, and like you said, like that rush has gone away and life has now hit you, and it's like, wait, this isn't a Disney movie anymore. What happened?
No. Yeah.
And so
go ahead.
Oh no, and I was just gonna say, so understanding that, one, that's normal, and 2, that there's ways to fix it, and maybe you're not going to get your Disney movie, but you are going to have a much closer relationship. Working through these things is super important. I think it will give people a measure of hope too, you know what I mean? That no, this is normal, this is okay, this is what we're supposed to do.
Well, we all do it. I always say that our partners are often the most dangerous people in the world, because we are vulnerable to loving them, to opening our hearts to them. And so it's pretty normal that a part of self would come up and go, what are you doing? Back away slowly, armor up, don't do that. And because this person is this and this, or you're unfit for public consumption. And so we build these stories about ourselves, and it's just one aspect, but it is an important one, because again, everything that happens up here happens down here. One of the examples I give when I'm first unpacking this guidepost is, let's think about your favorite food, right? Let's say
I'm there.
What's that?
I said, I'm there. Go on.
There you go. So even let's say in this vision, you've also just eaten, but someone comes by and they're like, hey, guess what I got? And it's your favorite food. And you're sitting there and you're looking at it, you're seeing, you're smelling it, and you're thinking about how good it would taste. And by the way, and when I do this, none of the foods that I think of are ever good for you. Right? They're never the good ones. No. And so I'm up there building this story about that cheeseburger, about that pizza that is just like so good, even though the pieces that I've omitted from that I've pruned away from my narrative is, yeah, that's a heart attack on a plate. But even though I've just eaten, all of a sudden my stomach starts to grumble. All of a sudden my body starts telling me that I am in fact hungry. And before I know I could eat, right? Even though I've just had lunch. In like kind, think about sex. Think about sex long enough and the things that you like to do when engaging in that. And pretty soon your body goes, yeah, let's do that. Sounds great. So our bodies and our brains are in a constant biochemical conversation. It's important to recognize the stories that you're telling about each other, and to do you made a great point. Recognize that what's the difference between a story that I'm telling and a relationship that I actually need to get out of.
I had read an article, and disclaimer, I don't know, like I haven't read like studies and things like that. So before anyone comes for us, this was just something I read. but I had read an article at one point in time about that they did, there was like a study or something done that said or showed that people who watched a commercial about like cake or candy or some, maybe they watched the Great British Bake Off or whatever it was, actually saw an insulin spike in their bodies. And like, and it, I think it's exactly what you're talking about, that you can work yourself into a place where you literally have a physical response to an outside stimulus of some kind, or just thoughts become feelings, become realities.
Right. And so when I talk about each one of the guideposts, I'll talk about what it is and give a good sound definition. I'll talk about why it's important, and I'll talk about how to use it. And so this falls in the category of why this is so important, because by and large, the body and the brain don't really know the difference between something that is happening inside as opposed to something that's happening outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see a lot of athletes and performers that have used this to their advantage, right? Mm-hmm. So if you imagine, it happened years ago. They were looking at Russian athletes at the time, and we're talking about Soviet Union athletes back in the 70s and 80s, and they were wondering, like, how are these guys doing so well in the Olympics with subpar equipment? Mm. And as it turned out, what they were doing is imagining their sports. Mm. And so if you're a downhill skier, they were sort of imagining the hills. They were doing it. If they're a figure skater, they were going through the routine again and again and again and again, imagining themselves. Hello.
Sorry.
That's okay. Imagining imagining
so professional. I'm sorry.
That's good. Imagining themselves in their event. Mm-hmm. What they did is they hooked these folks up to brain scans and scans the body while they were doing their event and while they were performing, and then while they were just imagining. And these PET scans, the graphs matched up almost perfectly, indicating to a large degree we don't know the difference. So this just ups the ante on that little thought that you said, like I was like, you're a stupid fuck or whatever it is. Like, you really feel that. That really rings in your body, if only for a second. But if you put it together again, you will start creating a belief system. Your body, when you see that person, you're like, I don't know why I want to rip your face off right now. I just do. And no one ever really talks about that. They just end up, fighting over dinner or something stupid.
Right.
The scar tissue based on these narratives that are, maybe we don't have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how much work happens? So, we talk about the narrative that you have with, a loved one or whatever, family member, friend, and the narrative that you have with yourself. So as we're talking about, like, thoughts become feelings, become realities, and and you can do superhuman things with it, or you can do really negative things with it. Something that happened to me today that I realized my own narrative about myself sucks. It was like my friend Jen texted me and she goes, "Have I told you how pretty you are today?" And I just stared at it and I was like, okay, what I should say is thank you. Yeah. What I should say, right? Like be gracious, accept the compliment, like, okay, and how much do you encounter it as you're doing your work with clients, that it's not just the narrative, it's not necessarily just the narrative that they have with their partner, it's also the narrative that they have with themselves that's keeping their partner from, like, breaking through?
A good bit. I was working with someone today, and it was a couple, and her story is, I don't deserve to take up room. I'm not worthy of that. Like, the story that she tells about, from a part of herself, is that I shouldn't take up any room.
Mhm.
And because she continues to tell herself that story about her, has those feelings, those thoughts become feelings. Um, she tries really, really hard not to take up a lot of space in that relationship. Well, because she's telling that story and sort of putting up those boundaries, he has a hard time connecting to her.
Mm.
Right? Think about it. What would it be like if she were to say, yeah, no, I get to take up space in this relationship. I get to ask for things. I get to
Mhm.
tell my truth. I get to let this person know what I like and what I don't like. Um, because those things that I like are really important. And so this cycle
Mhm.
starts where he's not getting enough information from
Mhm.
her about what it is that she needs and wants. So
Mhm.
he's not doing those things. She then starts telling a story about him that says, he doesn't really get me.
Right.
Well, yeah, because you're not giving him any of the information that he needs.
Right. Right. So where do you where do you go from here? You recognize it's a problem. I know you talked about like how you work with people, but let's say I'm gonna leave you and I'm never gonna talk to you again. What do I do? Do I start journaling about this stuff? Do I start, what do I do?
Yeah, journaling is a really good way to do it, especially if you're not working with someone in this capacity. Writing them down, but really just noticing them, paying
Mm-hmm.
attention. We have about 60,000 thoughts a day on average, and that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but paying attention to, especially the ones that are negative, the ones that cause some negative feelings, or if being able to gain an ear for, wow, that was some negative self-talk,
Mm-hmm.
or that was some negative talk about my partner.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to attain something in your life and you're spinning a story about how you don't deserve that thing or you don't get that thing, that's going to be a large impediment toward your ability to attain that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, if you're telling yourself a story that about how much you I don't know if you can hear all that yelling in the background.
I can hear a little bit, but it's actually really funny.
My kids are battling it out, I think.
Well, are you seeing like every now and again a rat tail
I
peeking up
do.
in
I've been
front?
noticing that. Just a skinny dog tail.
That's a Dane tail. Yeah.
It's far too skinny for the size of the dog.
Oh, it's ridiculous. They have
Yeah.
rat tails. Yeah, yeah. So between my kids and your kids this time.
Uh, so what we want to do is, again, turn the volume up on those narratives. Begin to notice the stories that we're telling, those thoughts, especially when they're negative ones about our partners, and asking that question. And this is really assessing the stories that we're telling for validity. And this is, again, how you would tell the difference between actual feelings and something that's just a narrative. It says, so you say, is this fair? Is this story that I'm telling compassionate? Is it empathetic? Is it understanding? Is it true? Sometimes it is, and you realize that I'm with an asshole, or I'm with someone
Sure.
who doesn't treat me very well, because that shit's true, and it
Sure.
is. And so you run that little validity test to see, and also looking at the part of self that you're telling it through,
Mhm.
right? Because if you're fully entrenched in your inner critic, and that person can do nothing right, then you might want to take a look at your story.
And is this something, so, as I'm listening, I'm thinking like, okay, I can recognize there, in my relationship, there's definitely narratives that I'm perpetuating versus narratives that are reality. And I guess my question is, do you, do you talk about those things with your partner, or is that something you should work through quietly? Ooh.
I have something really bad I've been thinking that I want to tell you.
Hey, so
You're a piece of shit.
listen, I just wanted to let you know for the last year, I've just been fucking hating your guts, man. Like, just,
Well, right. And I had one guy say, I feel like all I am is an ATM and a sperm bank. And the only reason you stay is because of the money. Uh,
mm, mm.
a lot of really terrible things. You're right.
That's not why I stay with Corey, just to be clear. It's not the money.
That's fine.
There's There's no money or sperm.
Oh, dried up. Poor guy.
I love him so much. I love him so much. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Right. So sometimes, depending on what's gone on in the relationship and depending how candid you've, like, often what I find is those stories have already been shared.
That's probably
Often in
true.
the heat of battle,
Mhm.
that shit's been said. And so if I'm sitting with someone and I have them turn up the volume on that, the really fun part is the healing that can take place when someone's able to say, I've been saying this terrible thing, and I know you've heard me say it, and what I know in this moment is that that's actually not fair, that it's not
Mhm.
even remotely compassionate.
Mhm.
And if I'm honest, it's just that I'm really angry with you, or I was really hurt by you.
Mhm.
That's the truth. Underneath the narrative is the truth of I was hurt, or I'm really angry with you, or this made me really sad. The narrative came from my reaction to that. When the narratives start, rule of thumb is the communication stops.
Mhm.
They might throw those barbs or those emotional hand grenades, but the real communication about deep feeling stops, because you cannot be vulnerable if you're throwing those things around.
Yeah.
So long-winded way around answering your question is maybe, sometimes, if and only if, really, if you're owning it and
Mhm.
saying, these are the things that I've thought that have been unfair. These are the things that I've said to myself that I don't actually believe anymore. But I do want to share with you this, that I was incredibly hurt by you. I felt totally abandoned by you.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
is that clear?
Yeah, absolutely clear. And I guess part of the personal responsibility is like acknowledging they have their own like side of it too, I'm sure. Like, it's not you. I would dare say that you're never the only one that feels, abandoned by a situation, or, that it happens on both sides of the relationship.
Mhm.
And so if you are going to share your side, or at least those emotions, like the personal responsibility would be that you also have to be accountable for when they make their own discoveries about their narratives.
Mhm. And to be
Yeah.
able to do that, and to know at some level that, like, that, there's healing in being able to be present for that, and to also hear that, like, um, I I wasn't being fair. And when we're
Mhm.
able to own, when we're able to own our stuff, it softens the space between us. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it's way easier to hear. I was telling myself a story about the fact that I thought you were a dumb shit or something like that.
Right.
And what I know in this moment is that wasn't fair. I was being a jerk, and you don't deserve that.
Mhm.
The thing
Mhm.
that catalyzed that was this, and that's true. And we can talk about that. But again, these are why the guideposts are so important, because it's tough to have that conversation if you're not in the wise self and the wise, healthy self.
Mhm.
If you're still triggered and you hear any form of you are a dumb shit and you're in your protective side of self, guess what's going to happen? The fight's going to break out.
Right. Right. Right.
So these are sort of recursive. They fall back on each other, and one leans into the other always.
Right. Right. I've also noticed that it's getting harder. Like like each time we hit a new guidepost, it gets a little more challenging, and you have to be that much more mindful of where you're at. You like I can see why you built these out the way that you did, because without the first two, the third one wouldn't work.
Just say it.
You're a genius.
There it is. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's my
Mm,
that's my
and cut.
No, you're right. They become a little bit more complex, right? So mindfulness
Yeah.
is pretty simple. It's like, pay attention to your thoughts and feelings. This can't be all of it, is it? Pretty much. It's just hard to remember to do it. And then it's like, parts, and that's really accessible to people because you can kind of go, oh no, yeah, no, I have this part of me that goes to work, and that guy's a real jackass. But
Yeah.
or there's a part of me that I see with my friends that comes out, and so that becomes very accessible to people. And compartmentalization is kind of a term most folks understand. When you start digging into narrative, then it's getting a little bit more nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, your question was an apt one. How do I know what's the difference between my narrative and these things that I really feel? And it takes a minute to kind of parse that out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And a willingness to be super uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
because it just is. Like, it's uncomfortable for me to say, you've created this story that is really unhealthy for your relationship. And it's also really uncomfortable for me to say, you've created this story about yourself that keeps people away,
Right.
and keeps people from connecting with you. However, but to your point about softening the space,
Yeah.
is I think I would add to that you're making room for better things too. Like, you're moving that negativity out of your space.
You're healing some of the scar tissue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So as hard as it is, it's worth it in the long run to run through that exercise.
This is the hard one because we have these thoughts, and stress and life gets in the way, and we just get a little lazy, and that's kind of what happens. We start cutting corners. So, and to that degree, I will say that I start trying to give other practices. I said before, gratitude practices. Like, I have people sit down and write out, like, what are they grateful for about their partner? What are those things that initially drew you to this person? And not just like a laundry list of, oh, they have pretty eyes. It's like a felt sense, right? You sit there and you say, I know their eyes. Yeah, no, they're pretty, but when they look at me, how does that feel? I'm so grateful for the way they looked at me. I'm so grateful for how safe I've felt, or how loved or connected to, or how great they are with the kids or my family, or whatever it is. We feel into, not just think about it. We feel into that gratitude, and that's where gratitude practice really works. Not in just thinking about, oh, I'm grateful for the sun today. No, what does it make you feel? And when you wait for that shift, that sort of chemical shift within your body, that's how you know you're doing that. That's gratitude practice. I also offer metta meditations. If you're unfamiliar with those,
Tell me about those.
So you sit, and the traditional metta meditation is to start with yourself, and you say something like, may I be abundant, may I be healthy, may I feel loved, may I experience compassion, may I be at peace. And then you pick someone that you know and really care about, and you say, may they be abundant, may they be healthy, may they feel compassion, may they be loved, may they be at peace. And then you pick someone that you don't know very well, and then, like, your mailman or whomever it might be, and then you pick someone that you don't like very much, and that's the traditional meditation. And so then you've kind of got that wave of lovely feelings behind you, and you bestow it upon someone that you don't feel awesome about. That might be your partner.
Sure.
But I encourage my clients to practice metta meditations with their partner as the focus. And so we think benevolently about them, and we actively shift and change the thoughts and feelings within, and practice feeling good things about them again. May they be loved, may they be at peace, may they experience compassion for me, right? All of those things that we practice feeling that way, and that begins to shift things. I also offer appreciation practices, and that looks like thank you. We laugh, but thank you. And these are the gratitude journals, the metta meditations, and the appreciation practices in the form of thank you are scientifically proven to help couples think better and to act better towards one another. There's several studies out there that I can talk about another time, but they show that if you practice these, you start thinking about your partner in a more benevolent, more kind, more loving way. And so everybody loves to be thanked, and everyone loves to have that sort of recognition. And so the rule of thumb in our house is, if you see a kid that's been washed that you didn't wash, hey, thanks for washing that kid. If you see a bed that was made that you didn't make, thanks for making the bed today. And I always tell the story. It's like, there's not a single day that's gone by, I'm going to say in the last like 20 years that I've known my wife, that she hasn't said to me, some version of, thank you so much for working so hard. And I can tell you, 20 years in, having heard it almost every day, it's never lost on me the profundity of what she's doing, of letting me know that in her heart, I'm appreciated. And that is something we hand back and forth, right? She gets a lot of great feelings out of saying it, and I get a lot of great feelings out of hearing it. And that's sort of a currency that we pass back and forth between each other, and I think that, it's an amazing practice, and it does shift and change your narrative. And if you're on autopilot and you're telling kind of shitty narratives from time to time, but you're balancing it out with these other practices, then I think the sum total is going to be in your favor.
It's also I think a mindfulness practice as well, of like,
ripped from mindfulness.
Yeah. Like, you're walking around your house and you're noticing things in that moment, and you're dedicating that mindfulness to acknowledging your partner. I know
who doesn't like knowing that someone was thinking about me even when I wasn't there?
Right.
It's a panty dropper.
You're right. It's funny because it's something that I think some people, and I can include myself in this, the old me, which is like, you're an adult, I don't have to thank you for making the bed. Like, it's what we do as adults, we make a fucking bed, and it's like, wait a second, that's a shitty way to live.
There are a lot of those out there, right? Like, she knows.
Right. And I was guilty of it too. And then, like, I realized first of all, how ridiculous that is. And second of all, that, like, it really meant something to Corey. And so now, like, if he makes dinner, I always say to him, I'm like, thank you for this beautiful feast, because the hunter in him is like, fuck yeah, I provided. Yeah. but it's things like that, like, provided. Yeah. And like, thank you for doing the dishes, thank you for whatever. So I think it's so interesting to me how, like, even things like gratitude, we will turn into something negative or whatever. Like, you can turn into something negative with a bad narrative, or and maybe it's not even your narrative. Like, I know for me, like, that sort of narrative came from my dad, or that you don't have to say thank you for things you're supposed to do, kind of thing. And so it's more than just like recognizing your narrative, it's also recognizing the narratives that you've inherited, through whatever reasons.
Well, and look, familiarity is something that we strive for within a relationship, right? Where we are fast to get to familiarity because we want to feel safe.
Sure.
But familiarity has a downside. We start cutting corners. We stop saying thank you. We forget about our gratitude practices, and suddenly, we're diving into these narratives, and we're creating bad feelings. But some of our friends make fun of the way we talk to each other, because, like, nobody talks to each other that way. And I'm not going to say it's saccharine sweet or smarmy or anything like that. It's genuinely heartfelt gratitude. And so we were at my parents' some years ago, and we had friends down from New York, and we had taken the boat out, and we had a day out on the lake, and brought the boat back in, put it all away, and we were sitting down having a glass of wine or whatever. And Ash turns to me in typical fashion and says, "Oh, by the way, thank you so much for driving the boat all day long. I really appreciated that." And my friend Brian goes, "Who the fuck else was going to drive it?"
Oh, Brian. Classic Brian.
Because, you know, what do you mean? No one else knew. So he's right. He's right. Technically, he is correct. There was no one else who was going to be able to drive the boat. Ashley knew that. Having said it, she still felt that it would be nice for me to hear that my efforts were seen, they were recognized, and they were appreciated.
Right.
Because had it not been for the skipper, we wouldn't have been out on the water, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yet another thing you're great at.
Listen, I mean, like a glove. I'll park that boat like a fucking glove.
Hold on. Was it a single engine or a double? Because if it's a double, the thing can park its fucking self. I'll just tell you that.
It was a single.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the way I tell the story, it was high winds in the sea. There's a fickle lover that day, I'll tell you.
Suddenly you're on a tall ship in the Atlantic. Like, you're not in fucking Lake Winnebago, Wisconsin. Like,
this is a no-wake zone, sir.
Phew, thank God you were there.
Hey, no one else was going to do it. Those fuckers would be still out there if not for me. This is the tale of our castaways. Been here for a long, long time.
Wilson!
Right. All of the sailing things we can think of. All of the references.
Oh my
I just
God.
dated myself and gave a Gilligan's Island.
I know you did. And I was there with you though, because I used to religiously watch Gilligan's Island as a kid. So
yeah. Come bombing through the door, coming home from school. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I needed to know what Gilligan was up to. Marianne, Ginger. Ginger was like one of my first girl crushes. So, and who wasn't, you know?
Come on, they were really, both of them were exquisite. Having said that, there's a lot of plot holes in that one. In that show.
You don't, what?
What are you saying?
Shut up.
Yeah, no, tons of plot holes.
Oh my God. So on next week's episode, we'll talk about
right.
We'll be taking a break from the guideposts to talk about Gilligan's Island plot holes.
Island. Right.
Yeah.
It'd be funny.
I mean, listen, it would honestly, it would be funny. Yeah. Maybe maybe if we eventually when we eventually hit this thing out of the park,
yeah,
someone's going to come back to these episodes and be like, I was promised a Gilligan's Island themed episode. Where is it?
Right. Well, guess what? We'll serve
right. We'll be fucking ready.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for talking to me about this stuff and for educating all of us on it. And like and subscribe. You can hit the bell for updates down below. Actually, I think it'll be on this side down there. Yep. And we'll check in next week for Guidepost 4.
Goodness gracious.
Are you ready for it?
Choosing.
God damn.
Pick me, choose me, love me.
Listen, how much harder is this going to get?
This next one's a little deep because it's not just about like your love language and it sounds like that at first blush, but when we dive a little bit deeper, it's where our younger parts come out to play. And it's where I think the soul of a relationship truly lives. Right. The reason that you actually came together is found in this particular guidepost, and that's a cliffhanger. The reason that you've chosen this person and they chose you lives in this guidepost.
I love that. I'm excited to talk about it.
Okay.
All right.
Prepare your loins. What?